Okay, everyone, this is a response video to whatever man who responded questioning my logic and motives in the video, Time for Men to Abort Fatherhood at Will. First things first, sir, you introduced yourself in your own video as a mangina, and I have to tell you that's quite true, but I also think you need to know why it's true. A mangina is a man who stands up for a woman's right to be treated like an absolute equal, but then steps up like a white knight to rescue her every time that equality becomes a pain in the ass, which is pretty much all the time. So the mangina, just like the gender feminist, promotes equality but practices special privilege for women, just like you're doing here. Case in point, at 229 in your video, you say that women are expected to be baby-making machines, and then you add in the annotations the term "and domestic servants." Now, unless you agree that women actually should be baby-making machines and domestic servants, which I don't think you're saying, then it seems apparent that you're taking a shot at the mentality that would limit them to those roles only. If that's the case, I certainly agree with you. Limiting any human being to any other measure than their own desires and capabilities is absolute nonsense. But this is where I go on to be a real advocate for equal treatment under the law, and you just go on to be a mangina. You see, men should not be limited to their roles either, sir. The expectation that men must fulfill the role of progenitor, protector, and provider is as archaic and outmoded as expecting women to fetch coffee and submit to a man's will. But you, sir, being the mangina, are preaching about freedom from gender roles, but would force men to stay in their roles that are self-limiting as long as they benefit women. And at the same time, while you would free women from roles that were self-limiting to them, but you wouldn't require them to give up the benefits that came with those roles. So first, it would help if you just nixed the bullshit hypocrisy. Second, you should learn to think outside your little PC box there and acknowledge the advantages and disadvantages of each gender role rather than just a lopsided version that somehow manages to translate each and every time to whatever the average woman would want to hear come out of your mouth. Now, let's take a look at how your complete blindness to half the real picture here has convoluted your perspective and literally defined your manginosity for all to see. You talk now as though you're being quite logical about causes and effects and associated responsibilities. You even give us a primer with a drunk driving analogy, reminding us that if you choose to drink to the point of drunkenness and end up getting yourself killed because you drove in that condition, then you caused your own death. All quite true, Mr. Mangina. So with that in mind, let's move on. You go on in to say, and I quote you directly, "Correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you have sex with a woman and you shoot your load inside her and the result is a pregnancy and the result of the pregnancy is that a child is born, then there is a chain of causality there. And I think it would be fairly reasonable to say that you are responsible in the action of having sex with the woman," and blah, 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 blah. Well, you said correct me if I'm wrong, and you certainly are, so I will. You left out a key part of the big picture here because, well, that's what manginas do. You were correct up to the point you say, and the result is a pregnancy. But that is where your logical assessment ends and your manginosity takes over. You see, from that point on, that chain of causation, that same chain your entire argument hinges on, is entirely in the hands of the woman. Everything from that point on is her call, and he is not allowed to be a part of it in any way. She becomes the person behind the wheel with too much to drink, and you just want to insist that he be chained in the front seat next to her with no say-so in where they're going. So your chain of causation takes a complete detour away from his power to choose and from what should be his responsibility. Oh, and let us not forget that part of the assumed responsibility on his part here is that we are talking about his child, his flesh and blood that he will love and support or take care of as a father. But once the life or death of that child is taken out of his hands and put unilaterally into the hands of the mother, then his rights regarding that baby have been totally obliterated. But in the Mangina mindset, we don't even look at that. We just place the man at her disposal for whatever decision she chooses to make. It's like wait for her decision on whether she'll kill your child and then be a man and stand behind her choice. Nope, be a mangina and stand behind her choice. I think it's time for men to start standing behind his choice. And if that is uncomfortable for some, just think of how uncomfortable you would be if he had a say on whether or not his child was allowed to live. Like many manginas, your intent is obviously good, but your lack of thought and sexism against men makes you a toxic part of the struggle for balance between men and women. You really need to start thinking more and acting less in ways that you think women will approve of.